body's bullshit blazing, still my heart is blazing. If the word kill me, I don't need a new.
Give me chance. Give me chance.
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am going to be doing a pyro damage showcase between Klee and Yanfei. I am first going to be going over the calculations, and then I'm actually going to show you in-game how they perform. I know that there have been tons of comparisons between these two characters because they're both pyro-wielding catalyst characters, and they're both very charged attack focused. And although they are very similar, they are also very, very different, and you should definitely understand those differences so you can see the potential of each character. So let me go over those differences first. So first off, Klee's E skill has a lower scaling than Yanfei's, but it can hit up to a maximum of 3 times with 1 bomb. And she also starts with 2 charges. So there's just a bunch of burst pyro damage built in there. Additionally, the mines can trigger and hit multiple times as well. Depending on the matchup and your team comp, that is a lot of built up damage. For example, if you use some kind of character that can pull in items like sucrose, all of those mines are going to hit. Or if it's a really, really large enemy, those mines are also going to hit. Klee's burst is also very different from Yanfei's. It's not a damage boosting burst, but instead it's a burst that just does massive amounts of damage in small ticks. The scaling is really low, but it hits so many times that the damage really, really racks up. I even went in game and tried to count how many times it hits, and every time I counted, it was hitting about 23 times. So that is actually a massive amount of times. But do note that the burst is better against single target enemies because all of those hits are going to hit that one enemy. If you fight multiple, then it spreads out across all of the enemies. Also, this damage isn't quite a good candidate for vaporized damage because it's not a single massive instance of damage. So there's pros and cons to this elemental burst. Yanfei's burst, on the other hand, is just a single instant damage and it enhances her charge attacks. So to get the most DPS with Yanfei, you definitely want to lead with her elemental burst. And these differences, they really do make a huge difference when you consider their overall DPS over a long period of time versus burst damage. So let's go over the math and calculations between these two characters, and in my math and calculations, I go for practical builds, mostly for free-to-play or low-spending players. So not very great substats, and weapons that are easily achievable. I go for practicality over maximum damage. And again, I have to go over the parameters for my calculations really quick. Calculations are done with a level 80 character, Ascension Phase 5, as well as a 4-piece Crimson Witch set with just 1 stack, and they are both using the Wid Sith at max level with the attack percent buff, and the substats that I added are very conservative. I am adding 3 rolls of attack percent and 3 rolls of crit damage, giving us about 17.4 attack percent and 23.4 crit damage percent. I don't have any pretty graphs this time because it's actually pretty easy to parse the data here when we are just comparing 2 numbers or 2 characters. So as we start from the top, we can clearly see that Klee does much more damage. This first row for Klee shows the damage output of every part of her kit. And the next 2 rows shows when we hit a normal charge attack or a sparked charge attack. For Yanfei, the first row is without the elemental burst buff, and the second is with the buff. This section also includes the elemental reaction damage though, so let's remove that in the next section because I said this was just a pure pyro damage showcase. So when we look here, it is still pretty much in favor of Klee, and Klee is doing tons more damage here. It's almost double. It's kind of crazy. And the major difference that really helped out Yanfei was that elemental reaction damage. Also, Klee's elemental burst is just a ton of just pure pyro damage. It's pretty freaking ridiculous. And so since Klee's elemental burst damage is so crazy, let's see how they compare if I were to remove just Klee's elemental burst damage. And when we do that, it turns out that Yanfei can actually start to pull ahead. She starts to pull ahead just ever so slightly, but is it really fair not not to include the damage from Klee's burst? I don't think so. So at the end of the day, Klee's damage with her elemental burst is a lot better than Yanfei's. But without it, Yanfei does pretty comparable damage to Klee. But what these numbers aren't considering is that Yanfei's E skill is on half the cooldown of Klee's skill and allows her to unleash a charged attack directly after. Klee is a little bit more random when she'll get the spark, but usually most people will do 1 or 2 normal attacks into a charged attack regardless if she has a spark or not. You can kind of think of the spark as a nice little bonus. And all of this is only considering a C0 Yanfei and Klee. When we include constellations into the mix, things can change pretty drastically because Klee has constellations that increases her damage output with defense down and pyro damage bonus, and a huge 555% motion value attack on her elemental burst. Yanfei's only damage increase is when she gets her 4th Scarlet Seal at C6. And so just from this alone, since Klee's got more sources of damage increase, she's probably going to beat out Yanfei with more constellations. But as a 4-star unit, Yanfei is very solid. So that was the math section of this video, and now I can move on to the live showcase because I am fortunate enough to have both characters. They will additionally be using the exact same artifacts and weapons, so it is truly a test of the character's damage output. Before fighting the Cryo Regismine, I swapped out their artifacts so that they have the exact same loadout. There is one thing I have to mention, however, it's that Klee's talent levels are at level 7 and Yanfei's are only at level 6, so that's definitely going to make a difference. This loadout is quite lacking in crit rate because I only have about 35%. I hate artifact RNG, I absolutely hate it. So anyway, it took a couple of tries to get a run that I was happy with. Let me explain. With Klee, I could kill the Regismine in 1 attempt every single time, but with Yanfei, I could not do that. In most cases, it would take 1 out of 3 attempts, probably because of the 35% crit rate. I wasn't hitting my crits enough, and thus I was not proccing the Blazing Eye passive skill, and I was also not getting the high crit damage numbers. So when it comes to Yanfei, you really do need that crit rate. A good portion of her damage comes from that Blazing Eye and just crit damage in general. Alright, it's comparison time.
Body's bullshit blazing, still my heart is blazing. If the word kill me, I don't need a new word under you. Soon you will know, we already know the smell of the game.
So what did you think? I think they were actually pretty close to each other. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Yanfei can hold a candle to Klee's damage. This test shows us their pure pyro damage potential, but it's not quite indicative of actual gameplay. When you fight enemies that, well, actually fight back, you'll notice a lot more problems. This is especially an issue with Catalyst characters in general. You are just a sitting duck, and dash canceling your attacks is going to eat through your stamina while you try to juggle dodging enemy attacks. I have found that shields are almost always a requirement for this type of gameplay, and well, arguably for most other characters, shields are pretty good as well, especially for the harder content, but it's most obvious when it comes to Catalyst wielding characters. But all those problems aside, I think it's very clear that Yanfei does pretty good damage when we compare her to Klee. And so if that's what you were looking for, then I hope that you found your answer. Alright guys, so this was my version of a comparison video between Klee and Yanfei. I know that there are a couple other videos out there that are comparing these two characters, and the way that they compare and contrast them is a little bit different from mine, so the results might vary, or the conclusion that they come to might be different from mine. But these are my final thoughts, and I hope that this video answered some questions that you had, and that you found what you were looking for. And so if you did, don't forget to hit that like button, and maybe even subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I will see you guys later.